We are joined today by the other members. We have Representative Barry Fleming, Representative Ed Reinders, and Representative Jan Tankersley. And I appreciate you all being here today, making the drive in to Atlanta. We had a previous meeting on August 20th where we basically had a 30,000-foot overview of all the different types of county governance structures that we have across the state. And we got a pretty good rundown of kind of how each county generally operates. Today we are focusing on water issues because that is something that every county deals with, and they deal with it in different ways. And so we are looking to hear basically best practices from the different counties and how their county structures impacts their ability to provide water services to their constituents. We have Pam Burnett and Mike Thomas from the Georgia Association of Water Professionals, Milbury Lankford from the Douglasville-Douglas County Water and Sewer Authority, Tyler Richards from Gwinnett County Water Resources, and Commissioner Nancy Jester from DeKalb County Commission. We have an upcoming meeting on October the 9th that will be held at Brookhaven City Council, where we will have a completely different topic. And then we will have a final meeting. I don't know that that date has been set yet. Actually, we'll have another meeting after that, which will be where we will hear public comment and recommendations, a report from the various committees that we've had. And then we'll have a final committee meeting that will discuss recommendations from the committee. Okay, I think we should go ahead and get started. We're going to try and keep everybody to about 15 minutes for their presentation, which I realize you have a lot to cover, so I appreciate you being mindful of our time today. So we're going to start with Pam Burnett and Mike Thomas.
Thank you. Pam has graciously asked me to speak this morning. My name is Mike Thomas. I'm with the Georgia Association of Water Professionals. I recently retired as the general manager of Clayton County Water Authority. My wife sometimes tells me I went backwards. I started out working with the State Environmental Protection Division. Spent about 5 years there. I worked for the Atlanta Regional Commission as an environmental planner and spent about 5 years there before I went to work for county government, and worked for the county government itself for a while, and then for the Water Authority, and retired recently, and now proud to represent the Georgia Association of Water Professionals. Our organization is made up of primarily the utility folks, the operators, the managers, the engineers. We also have consultants and vendors. Pretty much anybody who works in the water industry in Georgia is a member of the Georgia Association of Water Professionals. Blake asked me to give you kind of an overview of what water utilities do, what our function are, and how we're governed. So that's what I'm going to try to do here real quick in 15 minutes. So obviously, we're responsible for producing drinking water and distributing it to our customers. The first step in that is you got to have a raw water source. So you need a reservoir, groundwater well, a river source. So everybody needs that raw water source to start with, and then of course, we're responsible for treating that to very high quality standards. There are over 100 specific compounds that we have to meet limits for, and the federal government is developing new limits every year. So we're constantly reviewing the quality of our water and upgrading our treatment. Anyone who operates a water plant is required to have a state certification, and the state requires that there be a certified operator on site 24/7 at a drinking water plant. So we have very professional operators. They get a lot of their training from GAWP. Next step is you got to distribute the water to everybody. You know, we don't deliver it in a truck. We get it to you in a pipe. I like to tell people we deliver a tractor trailer load of water to your house every month. That's what the average customer uses. So it's much more efficient than using a tractor trailer. But we have a lot of pipe in the ground, and that's one of the biggest issues. Any major utility in Metro Atlanta probably has over 1,000 miles of water lines, plus they have probably the same amount of sewer lines. Some of them manage stormwater, so they also have that. So we use that pipe to get it to our customers. We also spend a lot of time worried about cross connections. You know, if somebody illegally connects to the water system, or if their system's set up in a way where they had higher pressure and it would push their water back into our system. So that's called backflow or cross-connection prevention, something we do with our distribution system. Leak detection and repair is a big activity, and Georgia really is a leader in the country now in leak detection. The General Assembly passed the Georgia Water Stewardship Act a few years ago, which required all of our utilities to report to EPD about how much leakage they have, and I think most of our utilities have made significant progress. The reason leaks are such a problem is the average length of a piece of pipe is 20 feet. So if we have 1,000 miles of pipe and each piece of pipe is 20 feet, there are a lot of pieces of pipe. There's a lot of joints. There's a lot of connections to our customers. So there are thousands of places along a piece of pipe that could leak during the process. So it's always something that we're going to struggle with and fight. But most well-run utilities are down in the 7 to 10% range of water loss, and then you'll hear about some who have as high as 20, 30%. But I think in Georgia, the majority of utilities have really tackled that problem. Pressure management's always an issue. If your pressure's too high, you're going to have more leaks. If it's too low, your customers aren't getting served well. So that's something we're always working on as well, using computer models and pumps to make sure we're maintaining that properly. And then fire protection. You wouldn't have fire protection without public water utilities. And it's a partnership with our local fire departments to do the hydrant maintenance. And at Clayton County Water, we had over 7,000 fire hydrants. So you can imagine that's a pretty big job, just taking care of all that. On the wastewater side, again, we collect raw sewage from the customers and then treat it. So a big part of the job is making sure you got adequate sized sewer lines in the ground that they can carry the amount of flow that's coming to you. We also look at what's connected to our sewer system. Some industries actually have permits with the local utility that give them discharge limits. We're always looking for sources of fats, oils, and grease coming into the sewer system because that can cause overflows. And it's kind of the opposite from the drinking water system. We're trying to keep the water in the pipes in the drinking water system and not let it out. On the sewer side, there's a lot of water that gets into the pipes. Again, most sewer lines, if it's concrete, it's shorter than a 20-foot stick of pipe. So you have a lot of joints, a lot of manholes, a lot of customer connections where water can get into the pipe. So when we have these big rain events, that's one thing we're always struggling with is keeping that water out of the pipe and maintaining the capacity and keeping the sewer in the pipe. But there's a lot of tools that we have that we can assess the condition of our pipes and check that out and work on making that better. When that water arrives to the plant, then we're responsible to treat it, and the state has permit limits that they give each discharger, and we're putting very high quality water back into our water supplies. Most of the time I would say that the water that's being discharged from the wastewater plant is cleaner than the water in the receiving stream or the receiving lake. And then solids are a big part of that. You have a byproduct that's left over that you've got to do something with. But on the sewer side, we do a really good job, I think, of reusing that raw material. Things are just too precious these days. Water's too precious. So we work hard at making that usable again. We can actually extract nutrients from the wastewater. We can get energy in the form of heat or steam. A lot of organizations do that, and they use that to power certain aspects of their plant. But then those biosolids are very valuable too. They're great organic matter. A lot of people use it as fertilizer. At Clayton County Water, we actually sold some of our product. We dried it to a small pellet form, and then they use that for agricultural purposes. And obviously nowadays, everybody wants that water back. We used to just be focused on cleaning it up and getting rid of it. Now we're focused on how can we get that water back because it's a valuable resource. The state also requires us to get involved in water issues from the local perspective on our streams and rivers and lakes, and we have to have a watershed protection plan and make sure we're doing what we can from a land use perspective to control the quality of water that is in our streams and rivers. So there is a big regulatory framework that we deal with. On the drinking water side, the U.S. government passed the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is responsible for administering that act, and that tells us how we have to treat the water, all the different safety and health standards. But they allow the states to take that responsibility. So in Georgia, the Environmental Protection Division and the legislature passed their own Georgia Safe Drinking Water Act. It has to be at least as stringent as the federal guidelines or more stringent. And then in the metro Atlanta region, across the state we have regional water planning bodies, but only in the metro Atlanta region does it really have teeth that we have to comply with. So the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District develops regional water, wastewater, and stormwater plans that go beyond these regulations, and each local government has to comply with those plans, and EPD actually audits the local governments to ensure that they're complying with the plan. Wastewater side is similar. Again, you have a federal Clean Water Act. The National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System is the permitting system, so you can't discharge water with pollutants to a water body without a permit. And again, the state took that requirement over and administers it through the Georgia Water Quality Control Act. So they have standards that not only our dischargers are supposed to meet, but also standards for the streams and the lakes that we discharge into. And again, we have the Metro North Georgia District that goes above and beyond that, and so most utilities in Metro Atlanta have complied 100% with those plans. So I would say the water industry is a very heavily regulated industry. However, it's focused on water quality and public health. I know you had some interest in customer service and asset management, and there's not a lot of direct regulation in those acts that address that. That is primarily driven at a local level. You know, we all have local standards that we're trying to meet. There are states that regulate privately owned systems. I don't know of any states that actually, beyond the existing regulatory framework from a customer service perspective, that regulate government systems. I found a lot of them that regulate the privately owned systems. And privately owned systems are not real significant in Georgia. Some states have a lot of and very large privately owned systems. Georgia does not. So when it comes to governance, the vast majority of water and wastewater utilities are just part of a county or a city government structure. They're a county department. They may have a separate enterprise fund, or the local government may actually create their own. You know, Marietta has a board of water and lights. City of Albany has their utilities together in a board. Those are primarily created for financial purposes. It allows them to issue debt a little bit easier than the county or the city's not responsible for the debt. The revenues from the utility is pledged for that debt. So that's most frequently the reason a local government would create an authority. But we do have state-created authorities that work very well, in my opinion. I was part of one of those. Clayton County Water Authority was created in 1955 by an act of the state legislature. A lot of times they got created where the communities were growing and they didn't have an operating system. They might have been a long way away from the city that was providing service. So these authorities got created, again, a lot of times for financial purposes, but also just to operate independently of the local government. Now, they're set up, though, every one has its own governance, so they're all different. Clayton County Water Authority, the Board of Commissioners appoints a 7-member board to 5-year terms. You'll hear from Douglas that they have actually elected officials sitting on their board, so each authority can be unique and created a little bit separately, and even the ownership of the assets can be different. Clayton County's position, the county actually owned the assets. Water Authority ran the system, installed all the assets, managed all the assets, but essentially they were owned by the county. So, you know, if you ask me what the best model is, I would probably argue the state-created authority is the best model. But I think any of these models can work well as long as our elected officials, you know, set those expectations and policies and then hire a professional person and let them run the utility with a minimal amount of interference. And that's difficult to do. I know as an elected official, you know, you want to make sure service is being provided. But I can tell you that was one of the most difficult parts of my job, is just managing that relationship and keeping us all in the right lane. And also providing stability for that manager. You know, a lot of managers in our counties and city departments have to be worried when when you have election season and elected officials change over, and frequently they change those managers. And I can tell you that has a big impact on an organization when their leadership is changed. And then making sure that your rates reflect the full cost of operating that utility. It's not popular for elected officials to raise rates. So often they avoid it, and you're just not keeping up with the asset renewal. That was an advantage of the authority. We didn't have elected people making those decisions, so they were shielded from that, and it was a little bit easier for us to make those rate adjustments that we needed to make on a regular basis. And I would say, those authorities, typically they're a little bit sheltered from political influence. We always referred to ourselves as a company. I didn't like to talk about being part of the government. We ran like a company. We operated on the revenues we received. We didn't get any tax dollars at the water authority, so we had to make it work based on those water and sewer revenues. Just to give you an idea of the kinds of utilities in Georgia, this is from an annual rate survey that the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority does with help from the University of North Carolina Environmental Finance Center. I couldn't tell you exactly how many utilities there are in Georgia. They contacted 544. There's probably twice that many if you look at all the very tiny, small water utilities. But 470 replied to that. Out of those 470, around 400 of them, over 400, are operated by a municipal or a county government. 6 of them were consolidated governments, and then state-created authorities represented 43 of those utilities. And then there are a few for-profit utilities, primarily on smaller systems. So knowing that customer issues are important, I'll just go through how, in my experience, those were addressed. It can be a struggle because government and most water utilities are monopolies. So we don't have the same incentive that a for-profit business does. But when I became the general manager, it came out of an engineering background, and I'll be honest, customer service issues kicked my butt in the beginning. And we weren't doing a very good job of it. We had a call center with 5 people. We had abandonment rates of 30 to 40%. We had wait times of 15 to 20 minutes. And when I started hearing all that, I realized we got to change the culture. So, it took a long time, but we went from a 5-person call center to a 13-person call center. We upgraded our software. We trained our people. We hired better people. And now the Water Authority does routine customer surveys. We rank around 80-85% satisfaction, but it is a journey, and we're real quick to spend money on regulatory issues, plant capacity, but we were slow to spend money on customer service. And I think everybody's learning that lesson now. We've got to devote more of our resources to customer service. I didn't want to be like the cable company, so I wanted somebody to be able to call and get a hold of us. So now a customer calls, and this is just about any situation, they're going to get a hold of some customer service representative, and I would guess that 90% of the time or higher, their issue gets resolved there. If it doesn't, everyone has an appeal process where they can go up the management chain. When I first became general manager, I was probably dealing with 1 to 2 customers a day. At the end, it would be 1 to 2 a month because we had the processes in place, we had the people in place that were taking care of that issue. But then if they didn't get satisfaction from us, they could come and speak to our board of directors directly at a meeting, or more frequently, they would call their county commissioner. Their county commissioner's constituent aide would contact the water authority, and we'd work with them to try to resolve the issue the best we could. We couldn't resolve every issue. Sometimes people just didn't want to pay their bill, didn't feel like it was fair, but we would get to the point with the elected official that we've done all we can do to this point. And then at that point, the customer doesn't have any other avenue to go. But the common issues that we would see were usually their billing questions. Hey, my bill's a lot higher this month than it was last month. What's going on? Or even more frequently, I can't pay my bill right now. I need some more time. And so that really tied up a lot of our customer service reps' time. It's just dealing with payment issues. And then people will have leaks. Sometimes those unusually high bills are due to leaks that they had on the customer side. The utilities are responsible for the pipeline up to the meter, and then the customer owns the pipeline past that, and frequently they have a lot of troubles. But we would work with them if they would show us proof that they'd repaired the line. We would do about a 50% deduct from their bill, and we would do that twice a year for a customer. And I've talked with a lot of utility directors about this issue. Again, we all had a little bit different policy, but most utilities had some kind of leak adjustment policy. And then the least common thing is some kind of problem with the water itself. But we were probably getting calls. We were getting, on a bad day, we'd get over 1,000 calls a day. But again, predominantly it went with people's income cycle. The first of the month was bad, a Monday was bad, so it was mostly related to payment and bill issues, rarely related to actual quality issues. This is a really good tool that, again, GFA and the Environmental Finance Center produced. They survey the rates of utilities in Georgia. Right now they're doing it on an annual basis. And you can find your community. You can look at the water bill or the sewer bill, or you can look at them combined. And in this case, so I took Clayton County Water and I compared it. You compare it with different things with those utilities that are within 50 miles of Clayton County Water Authority. So we were proud that our rates were pretty low. That's that upper left-hand corner. It's showing what the average bill is and how that compares. If the speedometer was straight up, then we would be in the middle. We'd be average. The next dial is conservation signal. What that's telling you is when people use more water, does it get more expensive, and incentivize conservation. If you come down to the bottom on the right-hand side, that's talking about affordability. The guidance that we get is that water and sewer should be less than 2% of your median household income. So in this case, we were less than 1% for water. And then on the left side, on the bottom, that gets to asset management. So that's showing, are you recovering your operating and your depreciation costs? Depreciation isn't a physical expense, but it's telling you how much money you need to be putting back in the system. And in our case, we were 1.35. They recommended 1.2. If we were less than that, the speedometer would be in the red. And there are some utilities that are in that situation. So from an asset management situation, there's not a lot of regulation, as I mentioned earlier. There's not a regulation that says, hey, utility X, you got to replace this many feet of pipe a year. But there are performance standards. We got to meet pressure mandates. We've got to meet permit limits. So that kind of drives us to keep our equipment in good shape. And there's a lot of assets in a utility. You have your plants and your equipment. The last wastewater plant we built was a $55 million wastewater plant. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of pipeline in the ground. And then you've got meters and valves and hydrants and manholes. So there's a lot of assets to manage. But I would say right now, most of our utilities, we're not building new capacity. We are worried about our pipelines. And you see news stories about that every day. And so this is, again, a graphic from Clayton County Water Authority showing the years that our pipelines were put in the ground. That first really high bar represents the decade of the 1960s, so that's when a lot of our urban growth was going on. So we put over 200 miles of sewer pipe in the ground in the 1960s. Now, sewer pipe can be made out of a lot of different things, and most people would tell you it's going to last from 50 to 100 years. So let's say that 212 miles of pipe was going to last 50 years. They should be replacing 200 miles of pipe right now. That means 20 miles of pipe a year, sewer pipe only, not talking about water pipe. That's not happening. I don't think any of us can tell you that's happening. And a lot of that pipe, though, might still be in good shape, so it doesn't need to be replaced. So what we do now is we really try to identify the pipe that's in poor condition and target that. The Water Authority, we really started putting a lot of emphasis on this, and I'd say, when I left, we were replacing around 4 or 5 miles a year, not 20, but probably getting the 4 or 5 worst miles that we needed to get. And, proud to say we weren't on the news every night. We had a minimal amount of problems, but it's something that really have to be aggressive with and stay on top of. This is again from that rate survey, and it's getting to that issue about who's collecting enough revenue to cover their depreciation. So the bar on top was from 2006 and 2016, and it's the percentage of utilities that were below 1.0, meaning they're not collecting enough revenue to cover their costs and depreciation. And so it says in 2016 that's already almost 45% of our utilities. And a lot of times that's not because the management doesn't want to do it. They're in a situation where for some reason they haven't been able to raise rates to an appropriate amount. So we know this is an issue. It shows on the bottom about 30% are above 1.2 where they need to be. So that's an area where we know there needs to be some work. So that's all I have. Be glad to answer any questions.
I have quite a few. Let's start with the reporting leaks to EPD. You mentioned that earlier in your presentation. Well, first I want to thank you for being here and for all of
You're
your very
welcome.
valuable information. This is not my area of expertise, so I appreciate you giving us the rundown. Okay, so what's the time frame that a county or city must report a leak to EPD?
Okay, I may have couched that in a little bit wrong terms. So what we report is our annual leakage index.
Okay.
So we don't report every leak.
Okay.
We give them an idea at the end of the year how much water we're losing through leaks.
Okay, do you know if counties or cities are supposed to report their individual leaks to EPA?
No, they
okay.
are not required to do that. Now, if it results in some kind of pressure problem and they've got to issue a boil water notice, yeah, they'll report that to the state.
Okay. And then the Watershed Protection Plan. Does each county submit their plan to EPD for approval, or is this just kind of like a notice situation?
No, it's part of their permit requirements. So
Okay.
they've got to submit it to EPD. EPD reviews it and periodically will audit and make sure they're implementing the plan.
How often do you think that EPD will do this audit?
They're more frequently going to do, in my experience, they're more frequently going to do an audit of that metro district plan, which is very similar. Probably not going to look at the watershed protection plan unless somebody has a permit renewal or they're asking for more capacity. So every 5 years at most.
Okay. So are there any penalties other than maybe not renewing a permit for noncompliance?
Oh yeah, well they're mainly tied to your permit limits.
Okay.
But there are operational things that we have to do that like sewer overflows. There are financial penalties for that.
Okay.
And there are, that's a good example of how sometimes we work on best practices. So EPD developed what they call a model consent order, and if you want to agree to follow all these best practices, and then you can sign up for this model consent order, you're not fined for small spills, and you're not put on a public registry. You know, as long as you're implementing the plan, they have more grace. If you're not if you're in the metro Atlanta area and you're not part of that, they're going to fine you for every spill that goes to state waters.
How much would a typical fine be?
Well, they're not going to do every single one because you're having several a month, for an average utility. And I've seen them, $20,000 for a year, $30,000 a year in that ballpark. Now, if you have some really big ones, you're going to be talking about bigger numbers.
Okay. So you were talking about how the state created the authority for Clayton County, and you think that's a great model. Who is that authority accountable to? Like, if it's not elected officials, and who holds them accountable for providing such great service? Like it sounds like y'all did.
So our Board of Commissioners appoints them and technically holds them accountable.
Okay.
And they could remove a member for malfeasance or some other issues. But, just being in that seat, there's definitely a lot of dialogue back and forth. And I had a lot of dialogue back and forth with the elected officials. I felt like in my job, if I didn't want political interference, the best way for me to handle that was make sure I was responsive to the elected officials and addressing those issues. So I knew all our county officials well. I knew our representatives, and they all felt free to give me a phone call.
Okay, and Clayton is a commission, right?
5 commissioners,
Right,
yes,
that's what I
and a
thought.
chairman.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. We'll go with Jan first. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. That's
Yes,
very
ma'am.
interesting. And you did bring to our attention that under asset management, there's a real concern or a major concern for pipelines. So how do you detect that a pipeline is becoming, compromised?
Right.
due to-
So it's a lot easier on what we call non-pressure pipes or sewer lines that aren't under pressure. We put little robotic cameras in there. There are a lot of different techniques. Now as technology improves, people can use sonar and other devices to kind of determine how thick the pipe wall is. Not only can we televise it, but there are instruments that can tell us how thick the pipeline is. And we can run those up and down the sewer line because we have these manholes that allow us access every 500,000 feet. On the drinking water side or the pressure pipe side, it's a lot more difficult because, you don't want to be putting stuff in the pipeline. Hard to get access to the pipe, but there is technology that you can put in the pipe and it will help you assess. But it's very expensive, very costly, so the cheapest way is just to look at the age of the pipe and say, let's replace this. But we're trying to be more sophisticated in using this technology, but it's not widespread on the drinking water side yet because of the cost. We're hoping that over time better technologies get developed. I'm sure Ms. Richardson from Gwinnett can share some technologies they're using that are available to us. But where everybody falls back to is age of pipe or type of pipe. We know that certain types of pipe doesn't last as long.
So you're not proactive. You're not going out and really doing an audit or looking at pipes in certain areas, but
No, we
you
are.
systematically have a zone that
We're very proactive on the sewer side, as I mentioned, because
Okay.
that's a little bit easier to accomplish and less cost effective. On the water side, we can dig in one costly way too and timely way is you can dig down and actually take what they call a coupon of the pipe. We cut a piece of the pipe out. So everybody's working on it. It's a matter of how aggressive are they working on it, how much money they have to
Resources.
put towards that, and how many people they have.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yes,
your
ma'am.
answers.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
This idea that you're chatting about infiltration, I think, with the sewer system, this concept of putting a sleeve down a sewer pipe and almost putting a new pipe inside of the old pipe without having to dig it up and replace it, is that generally cost effective, or can you generalize about that?
Yeah, we're finding, Clayton County Water Authority, we were finding that to be more cost effective in most cases than open dig, because when you're open digging, you're going to be cutting roadways, you're going to have to reestablish yards, you got to worry about utilities. Early on that it wasn't that cost effective, but it's gotten to that point now, and that was our preferred method of repair. But you have to have a pipe in the ground that's structurally sound enough to do it. So if the whole ceiling of the pipe has already come out or there's obstructions in the pipe, it may not be the appropriate technology.
So you have to do it kind of like repairing a road. You got to do it soon enough, or you have to put down a whole new road almost.
That's correct.
On the issue of money in the system, I suspect an independent authority, as you described, wouldn't apply to there. But if the city or the county runs it, I've heard these things referred to as enterprise funds. Supposedly, my understanding of an enterprise fund, it supports itself. And tax dollars, property tax dollars, for example, don't go into it, or the money shouldn't come out of it to support the city itself. Is that just best practices, or is there any law out there that says it has to be that way?
Well, it's a lot of times it's local choice, and like I say, it's for financial reasons of issuing debt. But it is, in my opinion, it would be a best practice.
Right.
But a lot of these enterprise funds, even some authorities, are paying some kind of franchise fee back to the local government. you know, the Clayton County Water Authority, we had to hire our own HR staff, our own IT staff. You know, we were a fully operating business, whereas if you're a department in a county, you're utilizing the county's HR resources, IT resources. They're paying some franchise fee for those services they're getting from the general government.
So the last question is about this creation of an authority, and you gave us examples. Some are created by legislation here. Others, I think you said, can be created by the city or county government themselves.
Yes.
So I mean, what's the difference between the two other than that created by the legislature, I assume, would have to be only changed by the legislature, and that created by the city or county government can only be changed by it? Is there any other difference?
You know, it probably comes down again to the local situation. In Clayton County, we serve several cities, you know, so there wasn't one government involved.
Right.
So it's simpler if there's one local government, simple for them to create that. But if you got multiple local government involved, then the state-created authority is probably the better route.
Our authority as legislators to create a state authority. If we create a state authority and the city and counties involved don't want it, they have no choice. Their assets get transferred to it. How
Well,
does that
now
work?
you're more an expert at that than I am, but I can
Yeah.
just give you my
Well, there's a lawyer behind you, I think.
yeah.
So,
I can just give you my experience. I mean, you still have to act,
right.
but you're going to listen to the local delegation,
sure,
right?
yeah.
So the local delegation tends to carry the most weight. But there was a recent example where they didn't do away with the Peachtree City Authority, but they changed the governance of it. But that was something that I think was requested by the city council. So, it's done by the state, but usually it's driven locally.
Well, and I guess my question, my thought process was, you've got a county government and you got 5 cities there, and 5 out of the 6 want to do this, and there's one holdout to it. That's the scenario I was thinking about. Can we create something that they have to join?
My understanding is you can.
Yeah, just like any other legislation.
Yes,
Gotcha.
yes, sir.
Thank you.
I have one final question, but first I wanted to recognize Representative Demetrius Douglas, who joined us, and Representative Beth Feskin as well. This is kind of a long one, so I apologize in advance. But legislators and staff have been working on a solution to the water consumer and maintenance issues seen throughout the state since my DeKalb colleague, Representative Carla Drenner's study committee in 2017 in the interim. We've had lots of discussions with state agencies, staff, other legislators, people in the communities to try and ensure that water consumers are protected and that future maintenance issues are being considered. While the details are kind of, still up in the air, we wanted to get your feedback in particular, as well as the members of the committee, about kind of an initial thought that has been floated around. Basically, in its most basic format, the bill would, or the idea would, give water utilities, both water and sewer, the ability to opt in to regulation, much like gas and electric are currently regulated by the PSC. If a utility chooses to opt in, they will receive certain incentives. On the flip side, if a utility does not opt in and several catastrophic problems occur, then the governor's office or a state agency like GFO would take over the management of the utility until the problem is corrected. Without going into the specifics on agencies, which will do, who will do what, do you see any initial pros and cons, kind of from like a more 15,000-foot view level? If you'd share those with us, I'd be appreciative. And have you seen anything like this in other states that we could use as a model example, or why we wouldn't use it as a model example?
Yeah. So as a former utility director, no additional regulation is something you ask for, especially if you feel like you're doing what you need to do, because it takes energy to make sure you're complying with that. But as long as the incentives are good enough, there was GFA now has a program they call Water First. So your community can go through this process of applying and being audited and approved to be a Water First community. The incentive is your interest rates on loans are lower. So Clayton County Water Authority did it the first time. We just wanted to be a Water First community. It was good PR. when it came time to renew that, it was a rather burdensome process. And we were getting better rates in the bond market than we could from GFA. So there was really no incentive for us to keep doing that. So the incentives are key to get people to do it. The model consent order process I mentioned, we held back on that for a while. We wanted to see how it was going to work. But when I saw that shielded people from a lot of grief, that was plenty of incentive. You know, not only were the fines lower, but it just shielded you from a lot of unwanted attention. So if the incentives are there, you would get some voluntary participation. And again, the devil's always in the details on these things, right? So how it's set up, how onerous it is to be a part of that, is all that's going to make a difference. But my concern about having an oversight body come in is all you have to say is Flint, Michigan. And that's what happened in Flint, Michigan. It was a financial reasons that they took that system over, and they had financial experts making decisions, and they made some very poor decisions. So the concern is who's going to step in, who's got the knowledge and the capability to make those decisions on behalf of a utility. I would argue if somebody doesn't have utility management experience, they don't need to be making some of these decisions. So to me, that's the biggest concern is, you know, who that is and who those people are and the details of what the whole program looks like. I mentioned this to Blake, I think, recently, is that an interim step might be that you had some kind of technical advisory panel. And so when you had an organization that looked like they were going down that path, these people could come in, offer technical assistance, do like an assessment. We have that in the industry where we have these groups who can come in and do an assessment of your utility and tell you how you measure up against the best. And so you could create something where, you know, you go through this assessment, you're given some recommendations on how to correct the problems, and you give them a period of time to make those corrections. And then after that, you still can't get them where you want to. You could have this takeover situation. But I think you need to give them an opportunity to really and give them some help to fix the problem.
Chairman Reinders.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your presentation. I want to talk about the full cost recovery. Last year we passed Senate Bill out of Governmental Affairs 404. Are you familiar with that and the what some local governments were doing as it related to regulation of sprinkler systems?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that exact one. But
And we did everything we could to try to come up with some kind of compromise, but it became a question of what is true cost of delivering a service.
Oh, you're talking about the fire?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now,
Yes,
I've
sir.
seen this movie in other ways. We can call it storm water fees.
Yes.
And the only reason why I'm concerned about that is because we are seeing, and the argument always is, and I get it, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You got a few bad actors in local government, and don't ruin the rest of it.
Right.
But we still have an obligation to make sure that the citizens are protected. And where I'm going with this is when we see new revenue streams that are certainly profit going into general funds, does it concern you in your capacity, in your professional capacity, that is not being used to replace the pipes that you said should have been done in the 60s? And is there some way we as a state, in your opinion, can mandate that those kind of new fees are used for replacement purposes? Because if not, we get hit with GFA loans and light items and budgets and fun things like that.
Yes, sir. I think we could all find some examples of where water and sewer revenue was used for other purposes.
Yes, my point.
And so that's where the enterprise fund makes a lot of sense. Is if you can shield that revenue from being used for other purposes, that is certainly something that I think every utility manager would tell you would benefit them, is shielding their revenue from being siphoned off for other purposes.
Madam Chair, that's something I hope this committee looks at is shielding it and making sure it's used for it. Do you have any best practices that you could bring to Representative Hansen on that?
Well, creating some kind of
Have you
enterprise
seen one of those?
fund. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're pretty common. And then the authority, you know, the way your charter is set up, we don't give any money back to the county. It says if we had surplus. Well, we've got a lot of capital projects to do, so we've never had any surplus.
If the authority is set up at the local level, I know you mentioned, didn't use this word, that provides elected officials from having or giving them a little political cover when they do raise
Right.
their fees and things of this nature. In regards to that, does that also give the authority the bonding power that they may need that the local may not have?
Depending on how their charter is written, but yes.
And that charter and the way it's written can that be rewritten through the legislative process?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
And let me mention something about revenues. We at one time back in the early 2000s, every year, if you were in an urban area, you were selling more water. In the summertime, you were selling a lot of water. And then water became an issue, and we had to figure out how to best use our water. And everybody got the message. So the average consumer is using a lot less water today than they used 10 years ago. So even when we're adding customers, typically we're seeing our sales go down. So a lot of utilities are in this spot where, their demand and their customer base is growing, but their revenues are declining. And so they're having to raise rates just to keep their revenues at a steady income because of less use.
Thank you. Are you following what's going on with the sewer spills in Albany?
I've heard a little bit about it, yes, sir.
Was it your testimony earlier that those kind of leaks into the Flint River do not have to be reported?
No, a leak from a sewer line must be reported.
Okay.
A leak from a water line does not have
All right.
to be reported.
Thank you.
One follow-up question on Chairman Rinder's issue there. We sometimes get mad around here because Washington, D.C. makes us do something, the one-size-fits-all rule, and it just doesn't work for Georgia. And the challenge for us, I think, is in that area of trying to weed out the bad actors but not have an unintended consequence. I think of this little city of Hephzibah near me. I don't know all the details, but from my understanding, they're sitting right on top of some kind of aquifer or something where the water just bubbles up out of the ground, and they have to do absolutely nothing to that water, and it's the best drinking water you can find. And they sell the water to their customers much cheaper than the surrounding communities, but they have to do nothing to it, and so they sell it for a lower price, but they make so much money off of it, they don't even have property taxes in the city. And so, there's an example of somebody that we may not want to tell them, you've got to put your money back in the system, or they'd be sitting on millions of dollars they could do nothing with because the water doesn't have to be treated. And I know they have to do something to it, but that's what they tell me. And they still don't have property taxes over there. And so, that's the one-size-fits-all thing that we have to try to be careful of, because you're going to have some anomalies out there that we don't want to mess up.
I have one follow-up question. I really like the idea, your interim step about providing help, because we don't need to do the hammer first. I'd like to make sure
Right.
people have the opportunity to fix their problems. My question is I don't like people coming to my house when it's dirty. So how do we get to, those counties or cities asking for help? Because obviously they have to have problems before they're gonna, need the advisory panel to come help them. But a lot of people don't want to say or admit that they actually have problems. So how do we, how do we kind of get people to, or counties or authorities or whoever to take the help?
Yeah, so we have some performance standards right now that address the quality side and the quantity side and the sewer spills, but you may need some additional performance standards that will incentivize people to ask for help. But I think if there was a known place they could go, I think most of them would be probably a little bit more willing to do that. GAWP has an award process, and you have to open yourself up to an audit to go through it. And our experience has been, if we don't provide a coach to help a new community through that, they're not going to do it because they're opening themselves up to some embarrassment. So I think if you're providing something, a lot of people will utilize it on their own, but then you may have to have some standards to kind of drive that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here and for answering all of our many, many questions and
You're
a
welcome.
wonderful presentation. Next, we're going to have Milbury Langford from the Douglas County Water and Sewer Authority. Yes. We've asked Ms. Langford here today because Douglasville and Douglas have an exceptional water authority, and we are looking forward to hearing about your best practices.
Thank you so much. I am not an IT expert, so I have got to find my presentation. Is it going to be here under presentations, Blake? Okay. That's why I'm always super nice to our IT manager. Representative Hanson, I appreciate that setup, and I am excited to be here with you to tell you what we do in Douglasville and Douglas County. I can tell you this, I've lived in Douglasville since 1975 when I was a little girl. I used to ride my bike up and down Highway 5. So now it's my privilege to serve at 34, our authority is 34 years old, founded in 1985 or created in 1985 when I was still in high school, but for 20 years I've been able to serve the citizens of my community in capacity of on-staff attorney. So let's take just a look a little bit about our authority. We were formed in 1985. There have been several revisions to our enabling legislation, but that enabling legislation sets forth what we can do. So we have the right to contract, to sue, to own property, to construct and operate projects, to adopt rules and regulations for our operation, and to do all other things necessary and proper for those powers. We were originally set up for water and wastewater. I'll talk about later how we took on stormwater. So Mike set up so many things beautifully for my presentation. Our board of directors is included the mayor of the city of Douglasville and the chairman of the Douglas County Commission as ex officio members. On a rotating basis, the city and the county appoint one of 5 citizen members. They serve 5-year staggered terms. So every year, one's rolling off and one's rolling on. They're allowed to be reappointed one time so they can have up to a 10-year term. And we enjoy that. So many times people are reappointed, and so they really become experts on our board. The city and the county take that seriously. They solicit resumes, they do interviews, and they do an outstanding job of finding us well-qualified and diverse representatives. We're managed day-to-day by an executive director who acts as really as the CEO. And then we have about 200 employees. 140 of those are in maintenance, both maintenance of our collection system for sewer and our distribution system for water. About 40 of those are in plant operations. We have 1 water treatment plant, and we have 2 primary wastewater treatment plants. And then the other 40 of us are in administration. And it's remarkable what we have in administration because we are an authority that just does all things water. Our executive director is a professional engineer and a licensed utility manager. We have 2 other licensed utility managers, a plethora of certified and licensed plant operators, 7 professional engineers on staff, 2 CPAs, and 1 attorney. And so what you find, the average tenure currently of our employees is about 10 years. In our top management staff, there's 150 years experience at the authority alone collectively. So we have a below average turnover, and we really feel like we have qualified professionals taking care of the citizens of Douglas County. I say it's the best of both worlds because we're a government model, but we operate as a business. So you see we're transparent, we're accountable, we're subject to open meetings and open records law. We enjoy the same sovereign immunity as the state. That was put in our enabling legislation. There's some differences between city and county immunity, and so we were able to get the same immunity as the state. Our property is tax exempt, so anything that becomes a facility or is used in operation of our business is tax exempt. We find a great benefit to the authority and to any government model because of that, because you can buy pipe tax-free. Then when we self-perform things or we have contractual agreements where we provide the pipe, we're able to save that tax burden. We have bond financing. It's based solely on revenues. We are not backed by the full faith and credit of the city and the county because we are an absolutely independent public body corporation. So we're a body corporate, but not a body politic. The only connection to the politics is that both the mayor and the county chairman sit on our board. And those rotate on and off. There's no term for them. It goes with their term that they're in office. We are subject to public bidding laws, and then we have the power of eminent domain. But I can tell you, when you look at our tagline, water, environment, community, that's what we're all about. And so we are neighbors with our neighbors. So we consider every customer, every citizen a neighbor. So we very, very rarely exercise that. We try to make everyone happy because they have a choice. You know, they don't have a choice for water. If they want water, unless they have a well, they're coming to us. But we never take that for granted. We don't want to act as a monopoly. They still have a choice. They can say good things about us, or they can say bad things about us. And we do everything we can to make sure that we are a good neighbor. Best of both worlds, here's how we're run like a business. And I really want you to look at the pie chart. Our annual budget is $45 million. We build it a zero-based balance every year, so we project revenues, and then we look at how we're going to spend that. Over 25% of that money annually goes back into capital improvements, which is our repair and maintenance, and our replacement. If I may, I wanted to, and I'm sorry, Blake, that I didn't give this to you ahead of time. I didn't put it in my presentation because it's so long, but I wanted to kind of take a look at it with you guys. And this is our business philosophy. Some of it seems a little dated, but it's worked for us since the late 80s, and we still believe it. What I want to point you to on that is we do not expect our citizens to fund development. We feel like they have paid their fair share, so their rates are based only on what it takes to provide them the service. If development comes, we want to support and enable that, but line extensions are paid for by the benefiting parties. We don't put those capital expenditures on our ratepayers. They're just paying for what they use. How they do pay for some of that capital is when you get a water tap or a sewer tap. That tap-on fee is paid at the time of connection, and it's based on their pro rata share of whatever, a $65 million plan or a $30 million plant. So at the time of connection, you pay one time your fair share of that larger capital expenditure, and then on an ongoing basis, you pay for what you use or what it costs to provide that to you. So we're really proud of that philosophy. We've looked at it and said, do we need to tinker it? It's so old, but it still works for us. What's unique, I think, about our authority, we were created by the legislature, and so that sets forth our powers. We've done that since 1985. We think water is water is water, which means water, drinking water, becomes wastewater, and stormwater also goes into our drinking water source. So we want to be the water authority. When the MPDES requirements were coming out and we were a phase 2 community, we looked at the city and the county and we said, what do you spend on stormwater? And they go, well, zero, because stormwater is not really sexy to spend money on. Nobody says, oh, yay, you fixed that pipe. Only if it's the culvert going to your house is it important to you. And so a movement out of the local community driven by the chamber said, hey, stormwater and all these new regulations need to go to the water authority. And that's what we think of ourselves as. We do now water, wastewater, and stormwater. And that one-stop shop really helps our citizens understand what's going on. When you look at, we have a population just under 150,000. If you think of an average family of 4, you look at our number of water customers, you see almost all of our citizens are water customers. A fraction of those are wastewater customers, and that's because for 2 reasons. It's heavily in the city, and then there's been some expansions out to the county, but we do not have public sewer in our drinking water watershed. That helps us keep our water source pristine. And then 44,000 stormwater customers. The only reason you wouldn't be a stormwater customer is basically if you have undeveloped property. And at the time that you put some impervious surface on the property, then you would become a stormwater customer. I want to speak a little bit to when we were formed. I said I moved there in 1975, and it was just after I-20 had been built out past to Alabama. It used to stop, you guys know, or some of you may know, at Highway 5 that I spoke of riding my bike on as a child. And the county system was bankrupt. The city system was old and struggling. It was a situation where if somebody wanted to sell their land, they would just go and get a fire hydrant and put it in the front of their property, and people thought there was water. And it was a system where in the 70s and 80s where, I want my mama to connect. Okay, we won't charge a tap fee. So when we bought, and I want to be clear about that, we bought the cities and the county's assets, we immediately incurred bond debt. We had to go into debt to do that. But they didn't give it to us. We bought those assets. So now we own them and we control them. So that's been effective for us. Let's talk about environment. I talked about that we have a beautiful drinking water source. The headwaters are just over the county lines. In Carroll County, it's almost exclusively in Douglas County, except for those headwaters right over the county line. And then our main dam is 200 yards above the Chattahoochee. So we discharge or we release flow into the Chattahoochee River. We also are affected somewhat by the water wars, not only being in the Chattahoochee Basin, but because we have agreements with other governments, primarily the Cobb-Marietta Water Authority, who is a wholesale supplier to 13 entities. We're one of those. But because they pulled their water out of Lake Allatoona, then that is also in the Flint. So when the water wars came through, we weren't immune, but we had all the water records. So we produced thousands and thousands and thousands of documents as other cities and counties and other water providers did. We believe water is a shared resource. We heavily protect our source. We have stricter buffers than the state requires. We have higher lot size densities in our drinking water watershed, and we have a rigorous septic tank maintenance policy. If you are in the Dog River Basin, and that's where I now live, not where I grew up, but where I now live, you have to have your septic tank pumped every 5 years and provide proof of that as a condition of water service. That means that a year out, we tell you, you need to pump your septic tank. 90 days out, we say, we haven't heard from you, you need to pump your septic tank. 60, 30, 10 days, and then we actually give them an after that 60-day grace period. But people do it. And that's because water, environment, community. We have educated our citizens, and so not only are we environmental stewards, but we expect them to be. We do buy from Cobb-Marietta. We sell to the city of Villa Rica, which is half in Douglas County and half in Carroll County. We are about to execute a backup water supply contract with Carroll so that when they need it, we are their backup source. So we feel like we're well positioned, but we're also partners. The state has an interconnection requirement, and we meet that with the governments that are around us, Cobb, Carroll, and Villa Rica. Finally, community, and Mike did a great job of talking about how customer complaints are handled. Let me tell you how it works at our office. We have approximately 14 customer service representatives, some on frontline window, and the rest back in our call center. We have one bilingual representative, since we have a notable Hispanic population in Douglas County. We wanted to make sure that we had somebody that can talk to our customers. So we track every call, we address every complaint. Within 24 hours, we will acknowledge and document the complaint. Now, this is for the 10% that go past the customer service. When I say that, our calls come through our customer service. 90%, like Mike indicated, for Clayton County are handled right there, and there's some resolution. Either we're going to adjust your bill, or we are going to give you a payment plan. But the ones that go past that first point of contact, within 24 hours, we'll acknowledge the complaint. Within 72 hours, we'll investigate and respond, unless an engineering evaluation is needed. And I say that because we do stormwater. Sometimes, and we always, if they ask, we'll send somebody, normally a professional engineer, out to the property to look at it. So if an engineering evaluation is required, we'll do that within 2 weeks. We have probably hundreds of complaints a day. We have thousands of calls a day. I'm sorry, we have hundreds over the course of the year. They go first to the first point of contact. If it needs to be redirected to a different department, then that would be the second point of contact, or they can ask for escalation to a manager. That would be a third point of contact. They can go to our executive director, and if they're not happy with that, they can go to the board of directors. I can tell you on 3 meetings a month, 12 months a year, I would say maybe every 10th meeting do we actually have somebody appeal to the board of directors. And that's because, remember, I said our customers are our neighbors, so we want to work with them. And since we've been more aggressive than that, focusing on water, environment, and community, Mr. Strauss, if he was here, and let me give apologies that he couldn't be here today. He's in Washington, D.C. in a chamber fly-in. I know he's appeared before some of these committees before, so he sends his regards. But that's what we do, and act equitably. When I have that on there, two things: be open and honest. We want to do right. Whatever the right thing is, do right. Sometimes that's to the benefit of the customer. Sometimes they don't like what the regulation is, but we play fair. Everybody follows the same rules. There's no free passes. We'll accommodate you and work with you to work out what needs to be done, but we really have that neighbor philosophy, and it's served us well. Finally, when you talk to people and you educate people, they begin to see that water is water, and water is important. So many people hear about the water wars on the news, and they don't have any idea that it affects them in Douglas County, and it does. But a couple of things. We partner with the city and the county, like Mike said. Similarly, if not only the mayor or the chairman, but if a city council person or a county commissioner contacts us, we want to partner with them to resolve what the issue is or to help them do whatever the need is. So we are very active in county government, although we're only a body corporate, not a body politic. We encourage all of our staff. We require our management to be active in civic clubs and community groups in the county so that we're having more touch points. And then from our public relations side, we have 34. In 2017, we had 34 community events, and we estimate that we had over 15,000 community touch points. This year, we're doing something new. We're having open houses at our water plant and our biggest wastewater plant, and asking the community, come out and have a day of fun. Tour the plant, learn something new, bring your kids, do the fun thing. We did our water plant a couple of months ago, highly successful, and we're looking forward to doing that again in October. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to invite the community to be engaged, because the more they understand, the better customer they are. So I think that's all my prepared remarks, but I'm happy to respond to any questions.
I had one question about kind of the transition and the initial setup of the authority post-legislative action. So you mentioned that the authority essentially had to buy all of the water assets from the county and city or cities. And you said basically that they took on their bond. How does that work exactly, kind of from a legal standpoint? Because, I mean, did the bond companies want to renegotiate the...
Well, what happened is we actually gave them a purchase price, so they defeased their bonds, and we took out new revenue bonds in our name only. But we purchased that. And those two original documents, if you look at the agreements to purchase, it had all the facilities, it had all the desks, it had almost every pencil that we purchased. But everything we took, we paid a price for, so the county and the city were able to eliminate the debt they had for the water and sewer, and we, in our own name, took that on. Over time, our bond rating and our interest rates, our bond rating's gone up, so our interest rates have gone down because we are so well managed. I will talk about rates. The board doesn't like to deal with rate increases, but bond companies like you to see incrementally every year an increase. So over time, as the board gained confidence in the management, our executive director has the right to administratively put place a rate increase as long as it does not exceed 5%. Anything over 5% goes to the board. I will tell you, we are well run and fiscally conservative, so what you're normally seeing is a 1 or 1.5% increase every year. So it keeps up with the cost of living expenses, so that you don't go, well, we didn't have a rate increase for 10 years, but now we need to hit you with 20%. And when people question that, but then they see, hey, you're working in my community, you're replacing this pipe, it's negligible when it's that amount annually, typically, and not every year.
Okay. I also wanted to ask about the capital improvements portion of your budget at 26%. So is that basically meaning that you all are just continually updating your pipes and that's meeting your needs? Like you're not going to have a situation 10 years down the road where you do like you said, everybody has to pay a lot more because all of a sudden we have to replace 200 miles of pipes.
Yeah.
Are y'all just kind of incrementally doing that?
We are, and we've done that over time since 1985. So we have actually a 50-year planning horizon long term. When we do the annual CIP, we do a 5-year plan, and anything that's outside the 5-year plan still has a projection into 20 years. So since we've done this long enough in water and sewer, we are keeping up with it. We also, because we're so fiscally conservative, and we have not only our planned CIP, but we have, for lack of a better word, an undesignated fund. I'll give you an example. Recently, we had a pipe delaminating, and it was a sewer pipe. And what they saw, they were beginning to see these odd pieces of material at the plant. They were able to trace it back, like Mike talked about, with a camera in the pipe, and see that it was just extra corrosive. So the laminated pipe was delaminating. We now, since we've been in business over time, have strengthened the requirements of what you can put in pipe-wise. So we have HDPE. On the sewer side, we use ductile iron pipe. On the water side, we require stormwater infrastructure to be anything that's public, concrete pipe. So we had this problem, and we got it budgeted. Budgeted approximately $5 million. Took public bids for it. The bids came in about $7 million. So we stepped back and said, what if we do it with our own crews, and we could cut that price by 75%. So we are now able to respond to a present need in present year with our crews. We also have a leak detection crew. We have an I&I crew. We have a right-of-way clearing crew, which means for every line, every easement over a 2-year period, they're clearing that and checking for any issues. And then complaints that get called in, we try to respond to within 72 hours.
Great. Thank you. Representative Fleming?
Right here.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So when you advertise your day of fun at the wastewater treatment plant, what
I'm
kind
sorry,
of people
I'm
do you?
having a hard time hearing
I said
you.
when you advertise your day of fun at the wastewater treatment plant, what kind of folks do you attract?
Well, a lot of employees bring their
Senators, there we
families
go.
for the free food, which is for employees only. We have a pre-event for but it may be a friend of an employee. It may be somebody that we did work for them. We had a few that wanted to just come out and talk to us about some complaints, but a good cross section. And we're hoping that our next event is even more. I will tell you, our South Central plant, based on again probably in the 90s, the oldest plant in the county was there. We had buffers around it. The city approved Chapel Hills Community and was going to let them build right next to our plant. We said, please don't do it. They said, we're doing it. So over time, this beautiful golf course community began to complain because there was odor at the south side. On an interim basis, we dealt with odor, but then we said, we're going to have to do something different. So we bought 300 acres, put our plant in the middle of it, and have protected that land around. So again, we can be a good neighbor. Now that old plant is now a regional lift station. So what was coming into that plant is pumped down to the new plant. But again, you live and learn, and now we have a much bigger buffer. I will tell you, we have regulations, but we in our regulations provide if the city or the county own it, we will serve it. So what that means is if we would have a 3-acre lot requirement, but that the county approves something on 1-acre lots, we would object initially. But if the political body acted to allow that, if they zone it, we will serve it. So we don't get anybody held hostage between what the city and the county want to do and what we would prefer. We still stand strong on environmental protection, but if they zone it, we will serve it.
Last question. So you've got Douglasville, you've got part of Villa Rica in Douglas County. Is that right?
It's in Douglas County, but it is our jurisdiction is unincorporated Douglas County, so we deal with Villa Rica residents on stormwater if you live in Douglas County, but then they get their services from the city of Villa Rica. All of Villa Rica does.
So you don't serve Douglasville?
We do. We serve, I'm sorry, the city of Douglasville, and then all of unincorporated Douglas County. And then when we have that overlap, we work
So
with
what would
them.
happen to your authority if Douglasville and Douglas County consolidated into one government?
Nothing.
You'd have to change the makeup, right? Because you have
If
the
they
ex officios.
consolidated, it would, the only thing I can see that it really affect is our board membership. And, you would either go down, I would suspect, to one representative of
Chair
the
and vice chair,
consolidated
maybe.
or two representatives. And that's what I would expect
And that would
would
require
happen.
legislative change, right?
It does.
Yeah, thank
It
you.
does, because the city of Lithia Springs, before it was disbanded, had a place on our board as well, but they no longer exist.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So y'all bill your customers?
We do.
Okay. And do you bill them every 5 years for their septic tank?
No, we bill them every month for their water service, and then if they are in the basin that's required to service their septic tank, you get all that notice. We would eventually cut you off if you don't do that. Most people, we have such a generous notify, and then they don't do it, and we'll say, okay, we'll give you 10 days, and they do it. We have not had much kickback on that.
I don't know how many other members of this committee actually have a septic tank other than me.
I do.
Living in rural Georgia, I mean, mine's 25 years old, so I'd have had to pay for it 5 times, and I haven't paid for it yet.
Right, and I don't know if your
I'm just trying to figure out.
Property is-
Go ahead.
I don't know if your property is located in your drinking water watershed. We don't require that countywide. We do that to protect our water source so that our citizens get the highest quality water at the lowest treatment cost.
How did you come up with a 5-year figure?
I'm sure somebody much smarter than I am that has some engineering and scientific background came up with that. And I don't mean to be catty.
And you're
but
not.
there was
and I'm-
science behind it, but I can't intelligently speak to that.
And I'm going back, my point is going back to the few, we don't want to do the mandates, the few bad actors, because you could wave your magic wand and say it every 2 years.
If we had a reason to believe there was an impact on our reservoir, we could.
Because, I mean, my county's never asked me to do it. We're fine, this and that. And I would have a problem with being mandated, just like local governments don't want to be mandated from the state. There's a part of me that would have a problem with being mandated that I have to call Roto-Rooter every 5 years because this authority that is not the political body, that I can't that I can't vote for.
Yeah, well, let me just respond to that. If there was a huge community backlash, we would discuss it with the city and the county.
It's just my backlash.
And if they that was their will, we try to
you
be
get
responsive
the, you get
to
the
the political
intellect, you
will.
get
I
the
do.
intellect of my point. You could do it at 2 if you wanted to.
We could do
And
it
if the
at
backlash
1,
wasn't
yeah.
big enough in your opinion,
But I do believe the regulations we have are scientifically based. We don't just make up things to, make you do it. I can tell you this. I had 2 teenagers in my house, and my water-only bill was $68. It was almost 12,000 gallons a month. I probably needed to have my septic tank pumped more often when I had 2 teenagers. Now we're empty nesters, and our bill is almost a third of that. So people will argue, oh, I don't have a
let me go down the rest of it. If we had an authority that was called water, sewer, and garbage,
Okay, well, let me tell you how that works. We don't do
Could
the
you then add
collection,
that
but
to-
I'm sorry.
could you then add that going to Mr. Harrell's bill, Brett Harrell's bill? Could you then say, because we put it on the property bill, that we could, I see him smiling at ACCG, if we created that kind of authority, could you then do not having your septic tank or not paying your water bill on a property tax bill that has to be due?
For us, no, because we don't get any tax dollars, and we are not in any way a tax. We bill you monthly. If you're a stormwater, non-water customer, we bill you biannually. But you could create an authority that does essentially anything that's a governmental function. I will say we
Madam
bill
Chair,
for sanitation.
I'd like to ask ACCG, could that theoretically be done? I'm sorry?
I didn't follow from the beginning of your question.
We have an authority? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I hope I was responsive to what you were asking. But I will say we actually bill for the city does sanitation, but they don't want to have to send out a monthly bill, and they don't want to wait for that to build up over a year. So we actually bill for the city sanitation collection. We don't do the work, but we put that on their water bill.
Since she added that, and if they didn't pay it, what would happen?
We have a priority of ranking, so how it goes, what it goes to apply to first. If they don't pay their whole water bill, we would, after 2 unpaid cycles, put them on a lock-off list. If they were disputing sanitation, we would allow them to do that and not cut them off for simple non-payment of sanitation.
Would this include renters who don't actually receive, or the landlords of property they actually don't receive the service for, your renters?
It depends. We don't bill the owners always. If a renter comes in and puts the water account in their name, then they are responsible and the property owner is not responsible. If the property owner keeps it in their name but rents the property, they're responsible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Langford. We appreciate your presentation and all of your answers to our questions today.
Thank you so much.
Tyler Richards is next, and I just wanted to kind of note we're at 11:23 right now, and it's my understanding we were supposed to be out of here by noon. So we're gonna kind of consolidate these things, or these next couple of speakers a little bit, but we want to make sure everybody gets to speak and everybody gets all their questions answered as well. So another example of wonderful water that we have heard about is with Tyler Richards, is the Assistant Director of Gwinnett County Water Resources.
Thank you. Good morning. I don't mind if you don't ask me any questions following this to save time. I do have a presentation which has a lot of graphics in it, and so I apologize for those of you at the back to it. If you want to move or don't care, that's fine. I'm with Gwinnett County. I've been here for 16 years in Gwinnett County. I was previously with the City of Atlanta for 19 years. So I went from a utility that had very old infrastructure to one that had very new and growing infrastructure. So it's been an interesting kind of ride for me. Our mission is to deliver superior services at an excellent value. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. I'll say that up front. What we do is, of course, we deliver clean, safe drinking water to our residents and businesses. We distribute it to them. We collect wastewater. We treat it at one of our water reclamation facilities to very high standards. And we also have stormwater services. And we serve almost 1 million people with a staff of 567. We run about a 10% vacancy rate. It's been pretty consistent even through the downturn and upturn. We seem to run that vacancy rate. I will say that when I started with Gwinnett County, it was sort of like a mom and pop that had now become a giant Walmart, and they were still operating like a mom and pop. And so we spent the last 16 years really trying to change the way business was done. It's a lot easier when you're very small to have personal operations than it is when you get to be a large company. I'm going to talk about our overview and some of our challenges. I'll cover briefly infrastructure, asset management, finance, and our customers, and then a little bit about governance at the end. One of our great challenges, of course, population growth. As you can see, we had a little bit of a slump during the recession, but it's picking up very rapidly now. We're seeing a tremendous amount of growth in Gwinnett County. And also our challenge is our watershed. The green area all drains to the Gulf of Mexico. Everything in light blue and blue drains to the Atlantic Ocean. And so we don't really have any water bodies except the Chattahoochee River and Lake Lanier, as many of our other local utilities. And so all of our drinking water comes from Lake Lanier. We have 2 water filter plants that take water from Lake Lanier and distribute it. And we have 3 water reclamation facilities. The F. Wayne Hill, I'm going to talk a little bit more about, sends very highly treated water back to Lake Lanier solely now, although they can send some to the Chattahoochee River. The Crooked Creek one, which is located off Holcomb Bridge Road, sends effluent back to the Chattahoochee River, and the Yellow River sends it to the Yellow River, which goes over to the Atlantic Ocean eventually. So I'm talking a little about the F. Wayne Hill Water Resources Center because it really is our flagship plant. Huge amounts of resources have been put into this facility. It really returns water back to our water supply. So we have some of the most stringent limits in the Southeast we have to meet to protect our water supply. It's one of the world's largest membrane ozone plant. If you haven't taken a tour, we give you a tour. We can give you some takeaways from it if you come. And we provide wastewater treatment for over 50% of the Gwinnett County citizens. And I will break in to say we do have a lot of events at our wastewater treatment plant. We do serve hot dogs, which I think is kind of funny. And a lot of our high school seniors get credit through science if they attend, so we do get a lot of kids coming, which is great. And they do eat the hot dogs. So this was constructed in phases, the effluent hill, and we spent over $1 billion between this facility and all the pump stations and everything necessary to get the effluent here. So like a tremendous amount of resources has been put into this. And we began sending water back to the Chattahoochee in 2001 and Lake Lanier in 2010, and now we exclusively send water back to Lake Lanier, about 30 to 35 million gallons a day. This Wayne Hill is basically it's a wastewater plant followed by a drinking water plant. And one thing we've really tried to do is make it sustainable. Not only do we reclaim clean water, that's the main thing it does, we also, as Mike was saying, we produce power. We could produce power from our methane gas that's generated at the plant, and we reclaim nutrients from some of our waste streams. So we have a 2 megawatt generator that can produce up to 30% of the plant energy necessary to run the plant. We actually have a fats, oil, and grease and high strength waste receiving station. We get tipping fees from that. It's cheaper for the fog provider to send it to us. We get tipping fees, and we make more gas to make more energy. So it's a win-win for everybody. And we get about $400,000 revenue from this a year, so it's not small. We also produce fertilizer, which is a very slow release fertilizer, very environmentally friendly, $400 a ton. We produce about a ton and a half a day. So it's a little over $200,000 a year we get from that as well. But we are really encouraging innovation. I just want to bring up that we are building a water innovation center that JWP is also a partner in, and we're getting partners from many other areas that will really encourage innovative technology development in the water industry. And we really do hope that it will spur economic growth for Gwinnett County and the region, obviously, but also it's a global issue, clean water is. And so really this research facility will have bays for pilot testing, everything else will be a real opportunity, I think, for developing new technologies for both locally and globally. So our pipe infrastructure, this is always the great unseen problem. We have about $8 billion worth of pipes underground that, people, like I said, don't pay much attention to until something goes wrong. Laid to end, it would go all the way from Gwinnett County to New Zealand. It's a long way. And so this is a graphic showing the growth in our collection system. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of hard to see on the screen, but it started out in the 60s, and you could see it slowly developing along the 85 corridor, and then it moves north and east. You could see a lot of pipes got put in the 80s and the 90s, and this was mostly done by developers. We did very little extensions. Almost everything was developers putting them in and then donating them to us, following our standards and specifications. And so here we are today with all these pipes in the ground. This is just collection. Distribution would be similar. It started out a little earlier. Some of the areas that are clear, Buford's up, and they have their own system. But also, we've got a lot of septic tanks in Gwinnett County. We have about 80,000 septic tanks, which is another issue. So asset management, why is it important? Well, to meet our mission, it helps us extend the useful life. It reduces overall cost. Like your roof, if you don't fix it and you start getting leaks, it costs a whole lot more than if you just fix it to begin with. Reduce emergencies, and also it provides better service to our customers if we have good asset management. So we've really focused on that in the last 10 to 15 years. And asset management is really not that hard. I mean, what is it? Where is it? What condition is it in? How are you going to maintain it? And then how do you afford it? That's really the 4 questions. And those first 2 ones are the hardest. It's easy for me to say in Gwinnett County, we've got a fantastic asset inventory, but our assets aren't that old. If you were to do that same map of the city of Atlanta developing or DeKalb County, you would see them starting out much earlier. If you get the information on an asset, when it first gets put in, it probably costs you 5 cents. You try to get that information 30 years later, it probably costs you $50 or $500, depending on the asset. So we are in a very good situation in Gwinnett. So in terms of our asset inventory, we keep it in our GIS system. You can go online. Anybody can go online and see any of our assets and the information about them. We have calibrated models which allow us to plan for growth. So that way we can be looking at upsizing pipes. Every developer that comes in, we run it through the model and make sure we can handle that, and we reserve that capacity in the pipe. And that way we don't run out of capacity when we least expect it. We reserve it for a year, and if they don't use it in a year, they have to come in again and ask for it. It is super important when you have a growing community that you keep up with growth and don't allow it to get ahead of you. But you need the asset information to do that, and that's key. And so here's a movie. We talked about TVing the pipe. I know you all wanted to see the inside of a sewer pipe. I figured I'd bring this to you. This is what we do. We do our higher risk pipes, our older pipes, every 5 years, and anytime we have a backup, to determine what the backup was. So that's how we do the gravity system and the stormwater system. We do it. And then we put in the GIS so we can see what are good pipes, bad pipes, what we need to be working on. We can look at it on a regional basis or on a local basis. And then we also use some new technology, and I'm sure some of the other utilities do. It's called a SLRAT. I think it's so cool because it uses acoustics. Basically, 2 guys in a truck can put these thing on manholes, and they use like these sound to determine if there's any plugging in the pipe. It's super accurate. Like I said, it's only 2 guys. So that way, if they clean the pipe, they can come in later. Is it clean? And we can test our pipe without having to run a camera in there all the time. So there's a lot of really great innovation coming out regarding this. In terms of force mains, I know Mike talked about this pressurized pipe and how difficult it is. We tried using something called a smart ball. You put the ball in there and you run it through, and then you take it out and you download it, and it could tell you corrosion in the pipe. Well, we lost 5 smart balls. They weren't smart after all. And so fortunately, we only paid for the data, so we didn't actually have to pay for it, which was really a smart contracting move by some of our folks. But now what we use is an electromagnetic. We only have to expose the top of the pipe, and they run this electromagnetic device along the top, and they can see the whole pipe and how thick the pipe is. So we've been putting about $1 million a year for this assessment in our budget. We have 250 miles of force main, and we put $2 million in there for repair and replacement every year in our budget for that. In terms of the water distribution system, we really look at age of pipe and material. We do have a leak detection group. We actually find that age of material and breaks are probably better. We've done projections, predictive models looking at it, very sophisticated. And we've done the coolest ever thing. We did a smart cities project, putting in smart meters in one neighborhood of 500 houses. And it's been incredible results where we've metered the water coming in, and then we meter all the separate houses. And of course, when you add them together, they should be equal. And if they're not, you've lost water. You're putting water in that's not getting to the houses. So we're able to find leaks there. But the most amazing thing to me has been is because it's real-time data, we can see when somebody has a leak in their house. And what you'll see is it going along, and then suddenly, their water use will jump up 3 times, and it'll just stay there and we've checked out these leaks, and a vast, vast majority are toilet leaks. Vast majority of it. I mean, I don't think people realize by a leaking valve in their toilet how much water they use. So we're using this to really determine how we communicate with people about preventing leaks. Because when we talk about our customers, when they get that big water bill, we give them all kinds of decreases in their water bill if they fix leaks. But what we really want to do is prevent it to begin with, or just stop it as soon as possible. So this has been a really great project for us, and we are looking at implementing this kind of smart technology throughout the system. But it is expensive, and so we're budgeting for that for the future. For the asset management of the plants, and I think if you talk to most wastewater facilities, they'll tell you that's one of the hardest things. I mean, you've got all electrical and mechanical and blowers and pumps, and they're all in corrosive environments, very difficult to maintain. And so we do this by performance monitoring, condition monitoring, visual inspection, and we've actually developed and went at a very sophisticated predictive maintenance group that actually we've been competing worldwide with other types of industry, and I'm proud to say we came up top three in the world, and the other 2 were the oil industry in Saudi Arabia and a coal fire plant in Singapore, and unfortunately I think the coal fire plant won. So I can't say we came in second or third because they didn't rank them. But, you know, all industries deal with this same sort of maintenance of their factories, and ours is, of course, a water factory. And so it is important that we look elsewhere other than just other utilities in order to find those new technologies and new ways of doing business. So then how do we fund it all? Of course, now we got the condition, we know what we got. How do we fund keeping this up to where it needs to be? And again, as Mike said, if you look at our water production over time, you know, this is our cash register in a way, right? This is the water we sell. And you could see that in 2008 we had a large decrease. It was when they put the water conservation measures in place for the drought. But we've had a 19.5% drop in water and a 23% increase in population. Wow. You know, I'd love to say our citizens are very aware of water and the value of water, but part of it is this, our tiered water rates. This is the tiered water rates. On the x-axis is the gallons used if a homeowner uses so many gallons, and then how much the rates increase as they utilize it. And it is to encourage conservation. And boy, has it worked. You don't see many industries are actually trying to prevent people from buying their product, but and it's good because it's going to lengthen the life of our facilities and the length of life of our water resources dramatically. But it is something that has worked well in terms of encouraging people not to be watering their yard or anything else excessively. We also look, you know, at the other utilities like us and compare our water and sewer bill against others to see, are we in the ballpark of being reasonable in terms of comparison to others. But I would say I don't like to look at, I don't think that this is a great measure, because I could be really cheap and not be keeping up my utility at all. And I could be way down on the bottom and everybody would say, great, well, I'm going to be paying for it eventually, right? So we want to make sure that we are charging the appropriate amount of money to maintain our facilities. So we look at a 30-year financial forecast. We look at a short term and we also look at a long term. Because we have the ability to do that, this is a cumulative cost to replace our existing gravity sewers based on what we know about the age, the material, and the length of life. Assuming that they live to their length of life, this is the money we have to be put in over time in order to be able to replace them. So how will we do that? Well, one way we will get money to do that is we do expect to pay off our debt service, and we don't expect to take any more debt out. So in 2019, we had a decrease of $16 million in our debt. We almost had $1 billion when I came on, and we expect to be debt free by 2030. Okay, so each time that's more money we can spend. So what we did is we looked at putting all these things on top of each other, and as you can see, the bottom line, I guess it's orange up there, the bottom tan line, that's our operating costs, assuming escalation in costs due to more customers and also just escalation and inflation. The red on the left is our bond debt going down. So then all the rest of it is either expansion we're going to need to do due to growth or keeping up our current assets. So in other words, we've got all our vertical assets, which are our plants, cost to maintain it. We've got new plants calculated in there, what we're going to have to do for expansion of service to a growing population. And then we look at the revenue. What revenue do we need in order to be able to maintain our system and also expand and do all the things we need to do? And this revenue was projected that we wouldn't have any rate increases until after we paid off all of our bonds in 2030, that any increase would be due to growth. And then after that, we would have a revenue increase that would be equivalent to inflation. And so, as you can see, it always bothers finance people in the county, and they finally got the picture that we're going to be saving money for times we're going to need it. It's not going to be spend our money every year, because what we want to do is make sure that we've got the money for those times when we need to replace our assets. So it's a little different model than most agencies that bond for projects use. But this is kind of the path we're going down. and I think this is almost the last thing except for governance. I wanted to cover at least about customer care. We have about 245,000 water meters, 172,000 sewer accounts, and we have 50,000 customer contacts monthly. That means people that call in, they come in to pay a bill. We have e-bill and email, and this all what we do. And then 253,000 bills are sent out monthly. So they do a lot. And what we've tried to do is improve it, because when we had that big downturn in the amount of revenue, now we can't shut down part of a wastewater treatment plant, or you still have all the costs you have to do. And I felt like we were really pretty onerous for our customers. I mean, it's like, you got this big bill, tough, pay it. And so we've really gone 180 degrees from that. And so what we've done, increased training customer skills for our customer care representatives. We have 4 weeks of classroom training, then 2 weeks of monitored on-phone training. And we've implemented much more customer-friendly policies, giving credits for when they have leaks, taking the tiered rates down to the tier 1, forgiving the sewer part of it if you had a leak in your yard. I mean, it didn't go to the wastewater treatment plant. So we really go to extreme to try to be fair to the customer. If the customer service person doesn't understand why the policies exist, then we've got a problem. They should be able to explain it. Oh, we're not going to charge you this because it didn't go to the sewer. I understand that. And we actually take them around, visit all our facilities, so they know what we do, which is important. But it has increased our time with each customer by 26% over time. But we have gone to online billing that has allowed us to reduce our customer service agents from 60 to 50. But we just asked the commission last month to allow us to take some of our part-time and make them full-time agents, because what we want to do is really decrease some of our hold times and everything else. We really want to get down to more industry standard. But I will say that we did win the J.D. Power Award for Customer Service of #1 utility in the nation. But I will say we were only 2 points ahead of Cobb County and 1 point ahead of Macon. And I think we won it with like a 760 points out of 1,000. And I always considered 76% as a C. So we've taken this as a challenge, and utilities are kind of competitive with one another. And so that's a good thing, I think. Governance, we have a water and sewage authority. There are 5 members appointed, 1 for each commission member. They own the assets, and they really do the bonding. And they approve. We bring every contract over $500,000 to them for approval. The Board of Commissioners, again, is 5 elected. They operate and manage the asset and adopt rates and fees and approve contracts over $100,000. So every contract, $500,000, I take it first to the Water and Sewage Authority and then to the Board of Commissioners. But the Water and Sewage Authority meets once a month, so it's a pretty rapid process, and they're very Board of Commissioners and the Water and Sewage, they're incredibly supportive. What makes sometimes the utility, I'll tell you what makes a utility successful, is the support not only for the commissioners that comes from all the other departments. For example, as not a true authority like Mike had. We have to be dependent upon our purchasing division. Well, if the purchasing division doesn't help us get what we need in order to do our job, it can be very onerous. And so we do have a purchasing division that has worked very closely with us to allow us to have contracts to bring in resources we need if we have any sort of issue at all. And so we've been very thankful that we have the support of the commission and the other departments. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Richards. I have a couple questions. My first one is about the smart meters. I'm from DeKalb County, and I know that we tried to implement some smart meters, and somehow it didn't work very well. What is the difference? Was it just different products, or what was the difference? Do you even know about who did what when?
From what I understand, and I want that the product they had was not the best, and that's one reason we did this Smart Cities initiative. Is we tried 3 different meters, one of which was supposed to be the best thing since sliced bread, and I could tell you we yanked it out pretty quick. But most people who put smart meters in don't do it the way we did it. It was kind of a new trial. Most of the time what they do is they use it so they don't have to drive around and bill.
Mhm.
I mean, they read the meter. And so it's reactive. In other words, you still get your bill, and then it's high, and you call, and then they can look back and say, oh, you had a leak 6 weeks ago, or you had a leak 4 weeks ago. The way we were doing it was real time. So, but it was only 500 people. So we were able to contact people. It would show up these, high water users. Well, it wasn't even high water. It was like if you had water running a lot between 2 and 3 in the morning, or 2 and 4 in the morning, it would kind of pop up. And then we could call the person up and say, it looks like you had a leak. And they would find it. And some elderly people really had a hard time with it. So we actually sent somebody out
Mhm.
to try to help them. And so it's sort of a different, think about it this way.
It's like a test
I
case.
get a text,
Yeah.
and it says somebody's used your credit card.
Yeah.
That may not be you. Well, can you imagine? You'll get a text saying you've got some water use in the middle of the night. Perhaps you ought to look for a leak. How good would that be for people then to conserve water, keep bills down? For people who are having trouble affording it, it would be great.
So do you think that the fact that y'all are basically running like a test case in a neighborhood was part of the reason that this was successful, because you put somebody on it and were kind of able to monitor everything and then realize what was working or not working?
Yes.
Okay. My second question was in relation to the septic tanks. You said you'll have about 80,000 of them. You heard Ms. Lankford say that they, ask people or regulate people, to empty these every 5 years. Do y'all have the same sort of mandate?
Well, we have an education program that encourages people to pump them every 5 years, because septic tanks, they settle out, and there's things that won't degrade, and after a while they'll fill up. I mean, it's just what happens.
Don't mandate.
No, we educate, and we spend a lot of time educating on that. But we don't have any. I will say this much, that the only ones that go to our water supply, we are in the midst of trying to take those people off a septic tank and put them on sewer, because it does go to our water supply. And so that it is important. It is something we have to consider when we're looking at proximity to water supply.
Okay. Representative Fleming?
Thank you, ma'am. The map that you showed earlier of Gwinnett County and where the wastewater treatment plant was, there was 3 water basins in Gwinnett County. Is that correct? Looks like
Yes.
it's right in the middle of them.
Well,
Maybe I don't know if you had that slide or not. Maybe I
do.
didn't see it.
I can
Didn't
look
see
back.
it right.
Let's see. Oops.
It's way at the beginning.
Yeah, I could probably do this easier if I was more savvy. I'm getting there.
That one.
Yeah. Nope. Next one. This one.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the big plant is right there below the word Chattahoochee, right?
Yes.
Looks like it's sitting on a hill.
It's called the Hill Plant, but that's not why it's called that. It's named for F. Wayne Hill, but it is on a hill. It's on one of the highest points in the county, which is not normally where a person would design a plant.
That's what
And
I'm
we pump
asking.
100% of the sewage that goes there is pumped there.
That's
And
why
we
you have
pump
so much.
sewage all the way from the very bottom of
That's why you have so many
Gwinnett
force mains.
250 miles.
Yeah, why'd that design? That's counterintuitive to every sewer system I've ever. Well, there's not many, but
Yeah. It's different. It's the only plant I know that we actually pump to and pump away. And I will say it didn't flood during the 2009 flood. That was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know, it was before my time when that was cited. It is very unusual.
I'm just wondering, is this the way all sewer systems should be built, on a hill?
I wouldn't recommend it just because the cost of pumping and the corrosion. And that's
Right.
part of, one of our issues is the force mains is corrosion and odors that tend to happen with force mains. It's something we're working on.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to ask about the smart metering. I know a community about to do that, and you referenced kind of in passing the elderly. In impoverished areas and with high elderly population, if you were to text them and say you've got a water leak,
They wouldn't, yeah.
you know
That's
where
not-
you know where I'm going, don't
Oh,
you?
yeah, I know.
Because they're not going to pay 125, 150 for a plumber
Right.
for that. What do you do then?
Well, That's been an issue we've
I
been
know.
dealing with a lot. And
Huge.
so what happened is we developed a very strong relationship with our senior community services. And actually, they gave us a list of all the senior customers that were at home and housebound and we're on the edge in terms of affordability and everything like that. And so we actually have them designate in our system that if their bill goes up a lot, we contact and we have a person and they go out and they help them. Because, I love when they say, check and see if you have a leak. Go out, open your meter box up, turn everything off, see if it's running. Well, my mother was 100 years old. She's not going to know where a meter is as
Right.
much as do that. So we have a full-time person that we send out on anything like that to help them.
Do you treat all homeowners the same with that person?
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's having issues. I mean,
And I'm because again, here we go with the bad actors thing.
Yeah.
So the 92-year-old elderly woman who has a flapper and the toilet's running. We've seen that movie
Right.
forever.
yes,
She owns her home. She's on a fixed income. You send the help out to her.
right.
Now, if she was a renter not owning her own home, do you send it out to them too?
Yeah, oh, sure.
So- okay. And because
I mean,
some
actually,
don't.
they're in
Some
more
don't because they can
problems
get the money
sometime.
reimbursed from the landlord then.
No, but we have renting is a real issue because
know.
of a lot of times they won't fix it. The homeowner, the owner won't fix it, and that's been a big issue sometimes with us because it's not the renter's fault that they've got a leak somewhere, and so we try to work with
Well,
them
sometimes
on
it
that.
can be, but that,
Yeah,
then I was
sometimes.
yes. So I was going to go on that end. If we're not looking at the elderly and we're looking at the more economically depressed
Mhm.
areas, again, I'm very familiar with this. Getting them to call what me and you would do like this,
Right.
and they may not do it because, well, they owe others for other things,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not pro conservation. What do you do in that kind of situation?
Well, anybody who's having an issue where they've got a high water bill that looks like it's a leak, but they don't know how to fix it, we send them out. And elderly, anything. We have a huge diversity in Gwinnett County,
Right.
and we have a lot of folks who can speak Spanish that we've been hiring for our customer service, and we also have the service where you can just, go to the on phone service where you can any language that they can help you with talking to somebody, and so we realize that people that come over here sometimes don't understand what not to put down, the sink, or if they have a leak, how much it's going to impact their bill, and many other things. So we've been trying to focus on those areas of people that this is not that they're worried about putting food on the table, and so. But I will say that
I also want to say you just because this is what I do to a certain extent. You've got a lease with someone and their
Yeah.
child,
Mhm.
and they don't want to let you in because there's now 6 others living in there.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with food on the table. It's just a life choice.
Right. Well,
And then we can't go in there and we've got a water problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Looks like we don't have any more questions for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Next, we have Commissioner Nancy Jester from DeKalb County.
So I need to change my presentation.
Oh, yeah, hey, she needs help with her.
This one right here. That's it. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm Nancy Jester, and I'm a commissioner in DeKalb County, and I'll try and talk quickly because I know time is of the essence. Let's see if I... Okay, so what we have is an intersection of how things can go wrong. We've heard all these really great stories. I wish I had a pleasant story like that to tell for DeKalb County government, but it's kind of the opposite. So we have a very uber political system because we have an elected CEO, elected board of commissioners, and we don't have any authority or any kind of barrier or stability between those politically elected officials and how we run our county water system. So we have just a Department of Watershed. So you have an elected CEO, they hire department managers, you end up losing a lot of competent staff because there's just such a churn because every time you get a new elected CEO and they're picking all these people. So the quality of the service diminishes and can become politically manipulated, and real and perceived corruption proliferates, and crises abound, and so on. We see this in this artifact here. So these are all the watershed directors we've had, and of course, it goes back to 1990. We currently, but if you'll look actually from 2011, let me go over my notes here. Since 2011, we have had 7 directors in 8 years. So, and you can see their tenure has been quite short. So it's very difficult to have long-term planning and successful, stable delivery of this public health utility when you have that kind of change and flux in your leadership. And I will note that I believe our last speaker was an engineer. I believe she said that if I heard correctly. Some of these folks, not engineers. So we have we have a twin crisis in our water department. We've got this this water billing crisis that continues, and I think we've fixed some things about the water billing, but we have there are many flavors of this problem. Everything from y'all discussed smart meters and how those were rolled out into DeKalb, and we had issues there. But we also continue to have issues. We just solved a problem in my office where a constituent had not received any water bill in 18 years. 18 years. So we finally got him a water bill, but it took us about a year to get him a water bill. We have people that we just have such a problem with government talking to each other. Billing happens in the finance department, totally separate from the operations of water and sewer. And so we've got people, they'll get new meters, but the meter won't in any way relate to their address or customer service. So if we get telemetry or somebody reads that bill and there's usage on it, it just goes out, into the atmosphere, and this person just gets a bill for like ready to serve, like a $19 bill. So they're not actually even being charged, but they don't know, right? Because they're just a person getting a bill and they're paying it. So we have all kinds of flavors of issues like that. Publicity about it because we're not shutting anybody's water off. So there's a moratorium on shutting your water off. We're giving people payment. We're putting people over here and going, until we fix your problem and we know we fix it, you're just going to pay this much. So it has made it has mitigated the noise level of people's complaints. But let me be perfectly clear, the structural problems still exist. So we are also the twin problems. This is a much bigger problem in my opinion. We are under a federal consent decree. So for our sanitary sewer overflows, our sewer spills. So we spill a lot of sewage into DeKalb County. This is a public health issue. And again, engineers running your department, when you politicize everything about the operation of this public health utility, you tend to have competency issues, and you tend to go down a very bad path. So in 2011-12, the EPA and EPD came in and put us under a federal consent decree. We are supposed to have our leaky system fixed by 2020, and everything I'm saying here is my opinion. It's the opinion of one commissioner. And we did, our presiding officer was here earlier, but he did have to leave, Commissioner Rader. But I don't personally believe we'll be done by 2020. If we're done by 2020, I would be amazed. We basically got 6 years down the road and didn't have a lot of accomplishments to show for it. It just took the county a long time to really take this seriously. Meanwhile, in 2016, we spilled more sewage. This is 4 years after the consent decree. We spilled more sewage than ever before. We had a spill in Brookhaven that sent 4 million gallons of raw untreated sewage into Nancy Creek, into the Chattahoochee River. This right here is 17 pages long. This is the second quarter of 2018's spill report that we are required to send to the EPA. 17 pages, 2018 second quarter. There's more where that came from. It's a real problem to DeKalb County. It's a real environmental problem. I think your government shouldn't be spilling raw untreated sewage into your environment. I think that's one thing we should be doing better, or not doing at all. I also think we're not communicating as publicly as we should about it. We do have a website up, and these are some of the things you can click on and see. But for instance, I asked just for an abundance of public safety, I asked our administration if they would put on social media when they had any of these spills, so that, say, for instance, if they had a few thousand gallons go into a creek that ran behind your house, you would know about it, so you wouldn't let your children go play in it and, possibly contract all kinds of diseases. They're not doing that. So every time we have a spill and I know about it, I do post it on my social media. So again, this is just central, everything that could go wrong with politicizing the operations of service and service delivery of basic functions of government have gone wrong in DeKalb. I think they are part of that cycle I just told you about. The Watershed Department is just one artifact of the outcome of that, where you see this tumult and turnover in the what should be very stable managerial, professional levels of service delivery. Certainly, the public health is at risk here. It affects the taxpayers. This is an audit that that has just come out from the Hartman firm that was done for our Office of Independent Auditor, and it discusses all the risks associated with the procurement process, how the procurement process is very opaque and not documented well. And so by the time it comes to the commission, all the procurements for all the things we have to fix for Watershed that's murky, right? So how we're managing the assets and the taxes people pay, or the fees that people pay for their water and sewer, I think is in question. We have some of the highest rates. We are still spilling sewage. So the EPA and we're paying fines. And we'll continue to pay fines. And again, that's just 1/4 of spills. So, and there was a time we underreported spills. Before our last permanent director, Mr. Toller, when he came in, he found all kinds of lack of reporting going on, and we had to go back and restate all of our reports for years before he would put his signature on it as a professional engineer. We have seen, DeKalb County sits right up there. You've got the perimeter, you've got the Dunwoody area. There's a lot, that's a big economic engine. The state spends a lot of money there with regard to transportation. So the state has an interest, I think, in how well DeKalb is doing or not doing. And I will tell you that developers have a heck of a time connecting to our sewer system now, because, rightly so, because of the scrutiny from the EPA and EPD, because we have not managed our capacity problems at all. So we have a leaky system, we have an undersized system, and there was a time at the end of 2017 where you could not connect to the system at all. We had there was no professional engineer that would stamp and seal a connection because they were very concerned about the capacity issues and the compliance with EPA and EPD, and this is a very large problem. We have lost technical talent. Our last watershed director left and is suing us because of his thoughts about how we've run our system. So, I'm just trying to sum up everything for you and give you some time for questions. So we're ground zero for how it goes wrong. And, I'm one commissioner, and I have many others that it's bipartisan effort, are trying to fix this, trying to reform government in DeKalb, trying to reform this department. Just some investigative things. These are a list of some ideas we have to reform our organizational act. It goes on for 3 pages. So, I think we'd like to partner with our legislative delegation. I think we'd like to partner with the state to fix these things. But make no mistake about it, there are public health implications when things, in a large county, 700 and something thousand people, when things go wrong. So I'll just conclude my remarks there and be happy to take any questions. I know there's limited time.
I just had a quick question, looking over this tracking report that you gave me. I mean, it looks like we had upwards of 700,000 gallons of sewage spilled in basically a month period, and I'm just taking 3 of the, looks like 10 entries of that. One of them, the almost 500,000 in Lithonia that happened, it looks like, it wasn't even acknowledged for 3 days. And then there's a lot of them that take more like 5 days. Like how, is that the length of time that it takes to fix it? Or is that the time that they estimate it started and then it was acknowledged or addressed?
And they fixed it. I can't speak to all the details of the reports exactly what I'm saying, but I do think I will just, in a general statement, I will say, I think we have gone back, in my opinion, we're not being generous about when we find it, when and how much it's. I think we're understating the volumes again. I think we are. I think we've gone back to that old habit. As to when they're reported, I have concerns about that. So I don't, I have not independently validated those entries. That is simply a quarterly report. So that is what we're communicating to the EPA and EPD. I think likely we're understating the volume. As far as the days, I can't really make a statement about that.
Sure. So one of the things you said, I think in the beginning, was that DeKalb has a Department of Watershed, but it's my understanding this is not any sort of authority, definitely not state created, not created by DeKalb County. So is that something that the commission has talked about, creating a separate authority, or would that have to be something that would come from the CEO?
Well, we have had discussions. There are, preliminary discussions with various commissioners. I'm a fan of that. I think that is something that needs to happen. I think, when you take and you start removing it a step from the politics, only good things are going to happen in DeKalb when you do that. So I am consistent in that. And, where all the commissioners fall out on that, I don't know. I think some would like to see that. I think some want to study it. Is that, but I would like to see us go in that direction. I think it could come from the commission. I mean, the commission could pass a resolution and give that as part of our legislative agenda to our lobbyists and to the delegation. I would like to see that. Is that a political reality? I don't know. Okay. Because it would take 4 votes of the commission to do that.
Right. So, and then a majority of the legislative.
And then the delegation would have to. Right. Exactly.
Okay. Oh, okay. Are you asking a question? Okay. Representative Beskin.
Can I ask a question? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Commissioner Jester.
Hello.
I was interested in what you were saying, that in 2017 there was no sewer capacity left, so inspectors would not stamp approval for the documents. Was that a county-wide thing, or does additional sewer capacity vary within DeKalb County?
So we have it varies. We have different sewer sheds, right? And the different sewer sheds are in, have different capacity limitation issues, right?
How many sewer sheds do you have? How many sewage treatment plants do you have? And really, what area of DeKalb were you not able to do any more development in? North, south, east, west,
so it's
northwest?
it's all over. I mean, we have limitations all over, and this is an issue all over. I brought up my area, the area at the perimeter, simply because there is so much development there. There's so much state money and transportation being spent there. So you want that to be an area where, commerce can take place. But if you can't flush a toilet, you can't put State Farm can't connect to a sewer system up there. You got a real problem, right? So treatment plants. So we have a variety. We have 2 main treatment plants, Snapfinger and Polebridge, and they are in the southern part of the county. We have issues with our nutrient capacity at Snapfinger right now. So that's a huge issue. Most of the upper third of the county flows into Atlanta's sewer shed into RM Clayton plant, right. and that is something that, again, I showed you all those different directors we've had. We have no long-term strategy. That contract we have with Atlanta is going to be up in 10 years. What's the plan? Are we going to keep, because we're paying a lot of money to the city of Atlanta. It would probably be beneficial if we looked at something else, but we're not planning, right? And then the very top component parts of Dunwoody, my neighborhoods, the very top neighborhoods that are very adjacent, flow into Fulton counties. That's the one, the Chattahoochee's at Little Creek, I think, is there. And so we have a variety of things going on in the county. But I fear we're not planning properly. And as far as capacity, again, it's all over. And the deal was we have not lived up to our obligation under the federal consent decree of the EPA to have a dynamic model for our sewer system so that we can use that to then judge our capacity issues on, right? And so we have a static model that we made, but this caused a lot of heartache with engineers and then there's political pressure. Politicians want to say, yeah, of course you can locate here. So, right. So when your boss who's hiring you as a politician and says, we have to say yes to this developer, and that's the hands you basically are leaving it in. You're not leaving it in professional engineers to say, no, we can't do that. Then you have a problem. And that's the kind of pressure we were seeing. And basically the EPA got a bit irritated with us because we were allowing connections to our sewer system that were not certified by a professional engineer. And they said, stop it. You get a PE to sign off on this or you don't connect. And so for about 3 months, nobody connected. And they were hustling to find somebody who would sign and stamp it. And I have concerns about that to this day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This is a very disturbing report to me, and you may not can answer this, but I understood or thought that EPD would be required to notify the public that a sewage spill of this nature would be that it's being addressed or that it's happened, and be aware of the public health concerns.
Yeah, and so we have required reports. So we do report to EPD, EPA, right? Now, what they do with it and what their requirements are, I can't speak to that.
They're not publicly posting that information. And as the Board of Commissioners, do you?
So we
is
posted.
it posted?
Yes. So
I know you do on
yeah.
your social media. But
well, they posted
that's
on that
just
website. I showed you the consent decree website. All of the spills are posted there. I just think posting it on a website, 5 pages down, isn't exactly alerting people, telling them, don't let your kid go play in that creek. We have a lot of creeks, right? A lot of watersheds. And so I'm trying to just elevate the public's knowledge about it, because the public, I think in many ways in DeKalb, they don't know what they don't know. And I've noticed as I've started doing this, I don't know how long I've been doing it, maybe 9 months now to a year, the interest in our sewer shed and our sewer issues has certainly in my district there's more interest. I'm getting more feedback from the community, because when you just say, well, we're under a federal consent decree because we spill sewage, that doesn't really mean anything. But when you find out, Flare Knoll Creek just got 2,000 gallons and that runs behind your house off, near Shalford and Briarcliff Road, well, that means something different. Surely and so then they become very interested. So, and we have a lot of repeat sites where we're spilling over and over again. We're having to buy property from owners because we can't stop spilling sewage in their yard. That has happened. It is a concern. So, my question is, so what happens? What happens to DeKalb County? And the EPA could put a moratorium on us if we and say, well, you can't connect anybody. You can have no new connections. And that's not in the state's interests either, to have it get to that point where basically economic development in DeKalb County halts, because the perimeter is an engine of economic development for the whole state. I mean, think of all the sales taxes that get collected there and then get distributed in across the state to rural communities so that they can thrive. So when you shut down a little, component part of the economic engine of the state should take an interest. And I think I would like, and I think for a while the EPA was not as and EPD were not as robustly regulating us as we should have been. I think we turned a corner last year, and there have been some changes, and they have been a bit more robust. But I would say we need even more scrutiny, not less.
I would have to agree. I would think that they would want to cut off development to if it's an already compromised sewage.
Right. I think and that's what they would say. They say, so we're going to stop. So what I would like to see is more robust enforcement of regulations, so you don't get to a point where just the only option is stop connecting sewer. You can't connect. So if along the way they could be more robust in their regulations of DeKalb and have more control over DeKalb, essentially, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Representative Fleming?
Thank you, Commissioner. So you have 6 or 7 commissioners?
We have
and a
7. We have 5 single district and what we call 2 super district, basically east side and west side.
And a CEO.
And a CEO.
Are
Mhm.
they all partisan seats?
They are all partisan seats, yes.
What's the partisan breakdown of the governing authority of DeKalb County?
I am the only Republican.
7 to 1?
So the
6 to-
CEO is a
6 to
Republican
1.
and 6 commissioners. I mean, the CEO is a Democrat and 6 commissioners are Democrats. Mhm.
The you mentioned earlier, I think you said you have a no water cutoff policy in place right now.
There's a moratorium on cutting it off. That's correct.
What has that done to your collections?
Our collections have actually been fairly stable. So that's there was a blip for a while in that, but I think that has mitigated itself. Now, the issue is the unknown unknowns, right? How many people? I don't think we're running the queries against the data, and I don't have any confidence in our billing data, right? Because these people are getting these outrageous water bills. So this is an issue because we go read a book of customers essentially, but we replaced some of their meters, and we replaced it with a meter that reads, let's just for simplicity, 1 gallon. So each one means 1 gallon, but everybody else's meter is 1 gallon is really 10 gallons. And so then you get these weird multiplier effects going on and people get some weird bill because we didn't calibrate the data right. And so you have all these data issues. So I don't have a lot of fidelity, or I don't think the data has a lot of fidelity to the truth and accuracy. I mean, we have all these different flavors of problems. So how many people aren't getting billed at all, or just like the $20 basically service to actually, just the service charge, but not actually paying. We had a guy the other day who had paid to have a plumber come out and fix a sewer line that was clearly county property. And he called and said, guys, come out. You've got a leaky sewer line. It's a sewer spill. We got to report that, by the way. And we told him, you're not connected to our sewer system. And we didn't come out. And he paid a plumber to fix it, and it was our side. And it took him calling my office. It took me calling the interim watershed director and saying, this guy's on the sewer system, and you're saying he's not, but you need to go look at this. So they did, and they went out. Yeah, he's on the sewer system. I don't know how many years he hadn't gotten a bill. And now we had a sewer spill. So we don't even know where our sewer pipes are. That's how bad it is.
Thank you.
Representative Douglas?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, thank you for, I guess, all your complaints and criticisms about the county you live in.
Critiques.
Oh, critiques.
How
Is there any good things about the watershed? Of course, let me just start over. I coach high school football,
Mm-hmm.
and I tell my players, if you're going to bring some complaints,
Mm-hmm.
you got to balance it out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me what's not working if you're not going to tell me some good things that are working.
Mm-hmm.
So everything's not bad, of course. Can't be.
So with all due respect,
Yes, ma'am.
coaching, and I have 3 children, and
Okay.
we have 2 boys, big basketball players, and I understand that. But I also live in a world where I want them to continue to be able to play basketball and be healthy and, play out in the yard and not get, some sort of terrible, disease because adults have failed them and we spilled sewage all over their environment.
Okay.
And so
Go ahead.
yeah, so I want them to grow up healthy, I want everyone's child to grow up healthy. And so if there are real critiques to be made, they have to be made even if they're unpleasant. What I will say about the government as a whole of DeKalb County, there are many wonderful people who work hard every day, and there are many services I think we deliver very effectively and efficiently. The Watershed Department is not one of them. That doesn't mean there aren't good people working there. There are some fine people. There are some fine people that have worked, and sadly we've lost because they've gotten frustrated. There are some people, that toil in anonymity every day to try and improve the situation. It is, and I'm proud of them, and I'm always amazed that that they stay as long as they do, given the unique and tumultuous political situation we have in DeKalb County. They're
Okay,
good people, but there's bad governance.
Okay. Aren't you part of that government, ma'am?
Oh, I'm absolutely, and I think that it is my role to bring these critiques forward, because for
Okay.
too long the reason the system has festered is because people are looking at their shoes and
Are-
they're excusing bad behavior.
Are you speaking on behalf of the rest of the commissioners? Or you
No,
just
as I
speak-
said when I started my remarks, these are my opinions.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you for your presentation. It is well past noon, so I think that
Thank
is
you.
all for today. As I mentioned earlier, we are having our next meeting on October the 9th, and it's going to be at 10 a.m. Is it the 10th? Oh, sorry. Okay. The 9th at 10 a.m. at Brookhaven City Council. We're also going to have a follow-up meeting on November the 15th. That'll probably be at the Capitol, but I don't want to say that for sure. So thank you all for coming today, and the meeting is adjourned.